Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're looking at a set of sources today that cover, well, maybe the most transformative and definitely the most tragic period in American history. We're talking about the 1830s all the way through the end of the Civil War in 1865.
It's a huge stretch of time. You've got these idealistic reform movements, then this massive continental expansion, and it all just it unravels into the Civil War. So our mission today is to really distill that complex history for you, the key concepts, the people, the conflicts, all in one focused review.
Okay, let's jump in. It really all starts with this spiritual energy, the Second Great Awakening.
Right, happening around 1800 to 1840.
Right.
And it's so much more than just a church revival. It's a fundamental change in how Americans see themselves.
How so?
Well, the old Calvinist idea was predestination. You were either saved or you weren't, and that was that. This new evangelical Protestant movement comes along and says, no, you can achieve your own salvation. You can choose to be saved.
It's very democratic in a way. It fits with that whole Jacksonian idea of the individual.
Exactly. And if you believe you can perfect yourself, the next logical step is believing you have an obligation to perfect society. They called it millennialism, this drive to create a holier, healthier, happier society.
And who was doing the work? Who was pushing these reforms?
Mostly it was championed by the Whig Party, which favored moral order. But the real boots on the ground were middle-class women. They found this new public voice through volunteer work as things like temperance, abolition, and women's rights.
Let's talk about the Temperance Society. The name temperance sounds moderate.
And it was. At first, when the American Temperance Society started in the 1820s, the goal was to limit drinking, not ban it completely.
So what was the motivation?
It was a deeply held belief that alcohol was the root of all of America's social problems. You see these illustrations like The Drunkard's Progress, and it's this graphic slide from having a drink with a friend to crime, homelessness, orphans, even suicide.
So it becomes a cultural battle?
A huge one. It often pitted these, Whig Protestants against Democrat Catholics, especially targeting the Irish, who they saw as culturally disruptive. It was about cultural control as much as anything else.
And if temperance was one version of creating a perfect society, the Shakers were something else entirely.
Oh, the Shakers took it to the absolute extreme. They were a radical utopian experiment founded by a woman named Mother Ann Lee Stanley.
Her followers saw her as a divine figure, right? Like the female part of God.
That's right. And they just rejected everything about traditional American life. They had communal living, shared wealth, a total challenge to capitalism.
But the thing that really set them apart was their social structure.
Absolutely. The part that baffled and frankly kind of threatened mainstream America was their practice of celibacy. No marriage, no sex.
So how did the group survive if they weren't having children?
They had to recruit. They brought in discontented adults, and really importantly, they took in a lot of orphans. And they were radical in other ways too. They believed in total equality between men and women and racial equality. They were a complete rejection of the American norm.
So while some Americans are trying to perfect society from within, the country as a whole is looking outward to conquest.
And that's the perfect transition to manifest destiny.
This idea that it was America's, God-given right to expand.
A God-given right and a duty to spread American institutions, Jacksonian democracy, Protestant Christianity, all the way to the Pacific Ocean.
And this wasn't just an idea, it was driven by powerful economic forces.
Of course. There was a huge demand for new land, for cattle grazing, for farming, that Jeffersonian ideal of the independent farmer. But the biggest driver was cotton. The Cotton Kingdom needed to expand constantly.
Which leads us straight to Texas.
Right. So Mexico actually encouraged Americans to move into its Texas territory. But they had rules. They expected the settlers to assimilate.
To become Mexican citizens.
Exactly. And become Catholic and speak Spanish.
Which of course they did not do.
Not at all. It leads to the rebellion in 1836. But then, after Texas becomes independent, the U.S. doesn't want to annex it.
Why not? They wanted the land.
They were terrified of the debate over slavery. Bringing in a massive new slave state would have completely destroyed the political balance. So Texas just hangs out as the Lone Star Republic for a decade.
Until President James K. Polk comes along.
Polk, the 11th president, was all about expansion. He annexes Texas. He settles the Oregon dispute with Britain, not at 54 Fort 40 or a fight, like he promised, but at the 49th parallel.
He backed down with Britain because he had his eyes on another prize.
A much easier target. He basically goaded Mexico into the Mexican-American War. And the victory in that war gets the U.S., the entire Southwest, the Mexican Cession in 1848.
And all that new land immediately sparks the crisis that leads to the Civil War. First, let's define a term that's really important here: free soil.
This is a critical point. Free soilers were against the expansion of slavery, but most of them were not abolitionists.
Meaning they didn't necessarily care about the morality of it.
Exactly. They wanted to keep the Western territories free of slavery for the benefit of white laborers, so they wouldn't have to compete with unpaid, enslaved labor. It was an economic argument, not a humanitarian one.
So with all this tension, you get the Compromise of 1850, Henry Clay's last big attempt to hold the country together.
A very fragile package deal. Let's break it down. First, California comes in as a free state. That's a big win for the North.
Okay. What else?
The slave trade, not slavery itself, but the trade is abolished in Washington, D.C.
And then comes the part the North absolutely hated.
The Stronger Fugitive Slave Act. It was a nightmare. It forced federal authorities, even in the North, to help capture and return alleged runaways.
And the system was rigged, right?
Completely. The commissioners who heard the cases were paid $10 if they sent a person south, but only $5 if they set them free.
And the accused person had no rights.
None. No jury, couldn't testify. It made the entire North complicit in slavery.
So what were the last two parts of the Compromise? The parts that just kicked the can down the road?
The territories of Utah and New Mexico would be decided by popular sovereignty, meaning the settlers there would vote on slavery later. The politicians just punted.
But the public couldn't ignore the issue after 1852 when Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin.
That book changed everything. It humanized slavery, showed its cruelty, especially how it destroyed families. Lincoln supposedly called her the little lady who started this great war. It made slavery a moral issue for millions of Northerners.
And just 2 years later, the Compromise is completely destroyed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act?
Yep, 1854. Stephen Douglas wants his transcontinental railroad through Illinois, so he proposes a deal. He'll grant popular sovereignty to the Kansas and Nebraska territories.
But wait, those territories were north of the line established by them?
The Missouri Compromise of 1820. This act directly reverses that sacred agreement, which had banned slavery there for over 30 years.
And it leads to chaos.
Total chaos. Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flood in and start killing each other. And out of that chaos, a new political party is born. The Republican Party, whose entire platform was to stop the spread of slavery.
And just when you think it can't get worse, the Supreme Court weighs in 1857.
The Dred Scott v. Sanford decision. Just a catastrophic ruling. It had 3 parts, each one more devastating than the last.
Okay, what's part 1?
First, the court says Dred Scott is not free, even though he lived on free soil.
Part 2.
Second, and maybe the most shocking part, the court declares that black people were not, and could never be, citizens of the United States. They had no rights, including the right to sue.
And the third part was the nail in the coffin for the entire anti-slavery expansion movement.
It was. The court declared that popular sovereignty was unconstitutional. The reasoning was that the federal government couldn't restrict property, and slaves were property in the territories.
A huge win for the South.
The biggest. It basically legalized slavery in all the territories and made the Republican platform illegal.
So with the political and legal paths blocked, you get John Brown.
John Brown, the militant abolitionist, decides violence is the only answer. In 1859, he raids the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to arm enslaved people and start a massive rebellion.
That the raid failed.
Spectacularly. He's captured by federal troops under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. But the impact was immense. The South saw him as a terrorist, proof the North wanted to destroy them. Many in the North saw him as a martyr for freedom. The country was at a breaking point.
And then the war comes. It is so important to be clear here. What was Abraham Lincoln's primary goal at the start of the Civil War?
Just one goal, to save the Union. He said explicitly he would end the war without freeing any slave, if that's what it took to restore the country. Emancipation was not the initial goal.
Let's compare the two sides' strategies. The USA, the North.
The North fought for Union permanence. They relied on a strong central government, expanding federal power. They used their industrial might and paid for the war with things like the first federal income tax, a flat 5% tax.
And the CSA, the Confederacy in the South.
The South fought for the right to secede. Their government, under Jefferson Davis, was intentionally a weak central government, which made it hard to fight a unified war. They hoped for a short, brutal conflict to break the North's will and relied on cotton diplomacy.
The idea that Europe, especially Britain, Needed their cotton so badly, they would intervene on the South's behalf.
Exactly. But that strategy and the whole purpose of the war changed on January 1st, 1863.
The Emancipation Proclamation.
It was a brilliant move. Lincoln issued it as a military act, using his power as commander-in-chief. He declared that slaves in the rebellious states were now free. He was seizing enemy property that was being used to help the war effort.
And this made it so much harder for the South to win. How?
Two big reasons. First, it guaranteed no foreign alliance. Britain and France had already abolished slavery. They could not possibly ally with a nation that was now explicitly fighting to preserve it. Cotton diplomacy was dead.
And the second reason?
Manpower. The proclamation led to the enlistment of nearly 200,000 African-American troops into the Union Army. Most of them were formerly enslaved, now fighting for their own freedom. It was a game changer.
What a period. We've covered a lot of ground, and that means a lot of presidents. 8 of them in this unit. Can you list them out?
I can. William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, and of course, Abraham Lincoln.
Perfect. All right, let's do a quick fire round to nail down some key facts for your test. Founder of the Shakers.
Mother Ann Lee Stanley.
Organizers of the Seneca Falls Conference in 1848.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott.
Which new territory were Americans reluctant to welcome into the nation because of slavery?
Texas.
True or false? The Republicans were free soilers, pledged to halt slavery's expansion?
True. That was their foundational principle.
The verdict in the Dred Scott case would have found the most support in what part of the country?
The South. It protected slave property everywhere.
Lincoln's primary goal at the start of the war?
To save the Union.
And who raided the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry?
John Brown.
Excellent. Now for a little sorting game. USA or CSA? I'll give you a term, you tell me the side and why. First up, the Homestead Act.
USA. It gave away free land in the West to encourage settlement by Northerners and ensure future free states.
Cotton diplomacy.
CSA. That was their whole strategy to get foreign help.
Raised money through federal income taxes.
USA. That was Lincoln expanding federal power to fund the war.
Initially hoped for a short, decisive war.
The CSA. They thought the North would give up quickly.
Jefferson Davis.
CSA. The one and only president of the Confederacy.
Longer federal government power.
USA Lincoln and the Republicans centralized power to win the war.
General McClellan.
USA.
General Lee.
CSA.
And finally, General Grant.
USA. You know, when you step back, this whole 40-year period is a struggle for what America was supposed to be. It starts with this internal quest for perfection, moves to an external one with expansion, and then just collapses when leaders realize they can't compromise their way out of the question of slavery anymore.
And the ultimate irony of the whole unit is just staggering. The South seceded to protect slavery forever. They even wrote it into their Constitution. But that very act of secession gave Lincoln the war powers he needed to destroy it.
By declaring war, they handed the federal government the legal justification to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which doomed their cause by cutting off any chance of foreign support. They sealed their own fate.
It's a story of unintended consequences. For decades, the country was held together by political leaders who were just brilliant at postponing the inevitable conversation. It worked until it didn't. So, as you review all this, here's something to think about. What major national conflict are we today simply managing and delaying, hoping it won't explode on our watch? Good luck with your test.